Thank you so much for joining us, Mark Collins and Brett Emmert. They are operators in Washington State and also Oklahoma, and they've got their fingers in several other pies. They do both growing and retailing and marketing and everything that there is to do. And they've done it so often now for so long that they are offering their services to others as consultants. And I actually help them with that on the legal side as well. So thank you so much for coming today, Mark and Brett. What we
Thanks
want
for having
to,
us.
sure, what we want to put on today is, instead of talking to another lawyer, let's talk to the client. Let's see what it is like from the person, the boots on the ground, who wants to enter the marijuana business and all of the obstacles, regulations, new laws, unknown challenges and things that they have had to face, and what it's been like for them getting advice along the way. And we just, hopefully this will be helpful to others who are just getting started. And then for the lawyers listening, I hope it's helpful for you to listen to what it feels like for the client, and what we could maybe do better sometimes. So set the stage for us first, guys. Just tell us how you got started and what it was like. Like, what were those initial conversations, and what was it like, getting started in a brand new state legal market with something that's still federally illegal.
So in 2013, we decided that we just wanted to do some type of business, and we didn't really know what that was going to be. And I was a huge advocate of cannabis just for the medical side of it. I had PTSD from the Army, and that was the way I used to treat that. So I started talking to my sister and my brother-in-law about what can we do in the cannabis space to maybe join. And we went and looked at the Washington State application side of things just to see what was going on, and realized that they were taking applications at the time. So this would have been in the fall of 2013. And, we just realistically decided to roll a dice and see what would happen. We knew nothing about what we were getting into, from regulations all the way to labor law, stuff like that. So it was a fun journey initially.
I think that's common. Not
yeah.
knowing all of the things that you would be facing.
It was our first real, big business adventure, and none of us really quite knew what we were getting into. We'd all come from different various backgrounds and corporate experiences and such. And so we all brought a little bit of different knowledge and expertise and things. And it's been a good combination. We're still a family-owned business. It started out that way and are still that way. But there's been a lot of hurdles to jump in that process, especially those early days, learning the laws, adhering to the laws, simple things like building codes and things like that were challenges to get over.
Yeah, a lot of them, just the ones you didn't even know about, were even more important. So you're like thinking about setting up your farm. You're not really thinking about your city building codes and your county building codes and what you need to do to apply with both of them. That was a learning curve for all of us.
Why don't you explain to us a little bit about the first 6 months to a year when you're discovering all of these regulations and all of these different laws, and what it felt like to keep discovering these things, and what kind of legal or other advice that you relied on to help you with that.
So initially we wanted to go ahead and build our farm out. So we signed a lease, did a letter of intent with the company, and then set it up to go in the summer of 2014. Well, we didn't know anything come that time period, so we just assumed we'd find a contractor. The contractor would take care of everything and start going from there. But it became pretty apparent that, well, no, we needed to have all these building plans and everything to submit to the city to be approved to have the building done. So that led us to having to find an engineer and an architect to design what we wanted to do and build it. Learned a very valuable lesson about asking about credentials ahead of time, because we didn't know to ask for a PE or a licensed architect so they can stamp the drawings. The initial person wasn't licensed to stamp it and didn't stamp the drawings, so we had to have them get somebody to stamp it, and cost more money in the long run to do that. And then it was just time consuming and stuff. You had to start dealing with the building department after that point when they came back with all the red lines on your drawings and everything, asking you to change things. And during that time period, had to learn how to be an advocate for ourselves. So going up into the building department and discussing what you're doing, trying to come to consensus versus having to keep paying an architect or an engineer to change these drawings and make the building department happy. A lot of it was just having conversations with them and learning how to deal with that. Now, at the same time, though, we're dealing with the regulators from the Liquor and Cannabis Board. At the time, it was the Liquor Control Board. So you're having to deal with them turning in drawings, showing what all is going to be done at your facility, when you may not even know if that's going to get approved by the city itself. So you're like trying to play this double-edged sword and try to, make sure it happens, but that you're not going to have a stop building thing put on your door and not allowed to go in. Red tag, I think is what they call it. But that was a very interesting time period.
Well, and then just finding the contractors that were willing to work with us, because there was a lot of the cannabis pricing as far as contractors went. Half of them wouldn't work with you once they figured out what industry it was in. And then the other half would say, okay, well, normally it costs me, $10,000 to do this project, but since it's for cannabis, it's going to be $20,000 for this project. Now, they wouldn't come out and say that, but if you had enough life experiences, you can pretty much, come to that conclusion that, wow, this is way overpriced, because they thought there was so much money in it. Not realizing that you had to grow everything first and be productive to even have an income.
Right.
But
like the tourist menu prices.
yeah.
They call it a cannabis tax is what they call it. And it's well known in the cannabis industry that when it comes to contractors, you are going to be paying a cannabis tax.
It sure is. I mean, I saw that when I was in Colorado. And so what law, was this the beginning of adult use in Washington?
Yes, this was recreational.
And so at first you wanted to grow, and then what transpired after that?
Well, initially we were wanting to set up a way to have like a spa where you would come in and use cannabis infused stuff to do your spa day. So we had applied for a license from then, but the rules weren't out for the state. So we didn't know what was going to be allowed and not allowed. We just applied for the growing side because that's what we wanted to do and open the spa. And then it became really apparent right away that that wasn't going to be legal. So it shifted to, well, let's create a brand that we can fill the stores in the state with and sell our products throughout the state, try to make money, and then hopefully one day do this spa plan that I think we've all consensus came to that we don't want to do. There's just not a huge market for that. But that was originally what our lofty goals were.
And so what other facets of the business are you involved in now?
Oh, Brett, you want to take that one?
So we're a producer processor. We have a retail store in Oklahoma, and we have a farm that we're partnered with in Oklahoma. We have a transportation side that we're in the process of getting up and running right now to provide services in Washington State for cannabis transport, with the goal of expanding to other states for that. And then, as you mentioned early on, we're partnered with you for the Southern High Points Consulting Services that we're offering, focusing mostly on the southern states, with the possibilities of others depending on the needs.
We also bought a stake in another company that does in-person events for the cannabis industry. They were growing prior to COVID. COVID shut down those in-person events. So at that time period, we bought a stake in that company, and we'll see what happens in the long run. But those are all the different businesses, and all of them are run around cannabis in some way, fashion, or form.
Well, I think it's fantastic that in 10 years you have spread your wings to touch all of these other businesses. So you've been successful enough to get to that point. And I'm sure that you've seen others around you not fare so well. And let's talk about them for a little bit. What do you think some folks do wrong that you guys got right, whether it be through trial and error because you knew what you're doing, that, a lot of, gets a lot of people off on the wrong foot?
Yeah.
I think the things that we did right was we just came up with a solid business plan and a method of working together to get through things. And then being smart with our finances. We've seen a lot of competitors quickly take any of the profits they made and, take them home and buy boats or whatever they want to buy for their own personal reasons, which is fine. That's their prerogative. However, we chose to reinvest every dollar that we ever made. To this day, we just continue to reinvest, which has given us the ability to stay afloat for one, stay competitive, and then also to continue to expand. So it's a happy balance. And then finding that balance with, if you have partners, if there's 4 of us involved in this business, and then with our other businesses, like finding that ability to compromise and your lanes of travel, like you pick the area that you are the strongest skilled in, and you move forward with that. And then the other person picks that area that they're strongest skilled in, move forward with that, and then try to stay out of each other's lanes so that you're the most efficient with that. There's obviously collaboration and compromise at times, but it works really smoothly that way versus, coming into arguments over silly little things like, should you have black pins or blue pins? Well, there's differing opinions on that, but at the end of the day, it's both pins. So all right, let's just pick the red one then. So
yeah, it's kind of piggyback on this too. We have utilized experts when we don't know things. So we do have a wide range of skill sets that's individual to each of us, but there's a lot of things that we just don't know. We don't know the law. We don't know supply chains and stuff like that. So we utilized experts to help get us some of these things set up and going to make sure we didn't fall into some of the other like pitfalls we saw some of our competitors going into. If you don't know how to manage your money, you should have somebody managing your money for you. If you don't know how to interpret the law, you shouldn't be fighting the law on your own. You should have somebody doing this for you. So it's just, respecting the skill sets of your partners and then utilizing experts when you can't do it yourself.
I like how you've been very smart with your money. And I think, Mark, one time you pointed out that the way that y'all manage your money allowed you to have something on hand when there's a downturn or when something bad happens, you've got some reserves. So it's very smart that you showed the restraint there and didn't go run out and buy a yacht right away. And the other thing, I did like how y'all described how y'all came together on, this is my skill, this is your skill, this is your lane, that's my lane. And I thought that the way that y'all did that was very smart because, of course, as a business litigation lawyer, I mean, most of my lawsuits are over partners who have gotten crossways. There were different expectations. They couldn't agree, or one person did some bad stuff. And we see that really rampant in the cannabis industry, probably even more than regular. So could you give a little advice to some other teams on, setting your pride aside and having certain lanes of how partners ought to work together, because y'all have been really successful at that for a whole decade.
I think from our perspective, or at least my perspective, I like money more than I like arguing. So when it comes down to everything, we're trying to make money here. And if we're arguing, we're losing money. So sometimes you do have to just suck that pride up. And even if you think you're right and you're adamant about it, well, what difference does it make if the other person is right? At the end, the money will show who's right. And we're no different than anybody else. We had our arguments and our disagreements. We just learned how to separate that and then compromise in the long run. We've also learned how to compartmentalize. So if you're angry with one thing, don't hold it over to another thing, because you have to make multiple decisions.
Yep. Well, like I said, y'all have done a great job with this. Why don't we talk about some of the different challenges you faced and how you overcome them? How about a regulatory challenge that you weren't prepared for, but you had to address, and maybe some other mistakes or successes in confronting these regulations?
For me, I think the biggest one is just the responsiveness of the regulatory agencies. They work on their own time frame, and it can be very frustrating, and it can be very financially taxing when you're waiting on them, but things are still continuing to move forward on the other side. So for me, that's the big one, and not getting the answers that you need in order to not because of a delay, but them actually giving you the correct answers you need to make the decisions you need to make and move forward from there.
Yeah, I think another thing that happens a lot with regulatory agencies is you're just not even aware that there is somebody that regulates something. I mean, here in Washington State, we're dealing with, I think it's around 5 different regulatory agencies. Oklahoma, it's roughly the same, but I think they got a little bit more actually. And some of these you just don't even really know. So like to give a practical example, how many people know that your weight or your scales have to be certified, not only when you buy them through the vendor itself, but then you have a regulatory agency that's going to come out and check them and make sure that they're up to standard and that you have them listed on your business license to use. If you don't, you're not legal for trade in the state, and they can make you pull your products off the shelves and not sell it because you have to deal with weights for our business. So there's just a lot of these things that you deal with, and it behooves you to talk to people and learn from people what you may run into. I mean, this is where people like you, Lisa, are amazing, right? Because you've already dealt with so many different cannabis companies in different places, and you understand some of these regulatory hurdles that people run into. But the agencies that are going to be coming to enforce these regulations as well. Another like just practical small thing that I don't think people really even think about per se. We have federal laws we still have to follow, even if federal rules don't apply to us, right? So labeling requirements is one that I like to think about. When you put a weight on your product, that weight has to be in both metric and standard, and it also has to be bigger than everything else on your label. Otherwise, you are breaking federal labeling laws. I can't remember what it's actually called, but you're breaking that. Something I see in the cannabis industry quite a lot when it comes to labeling is this therapeutic effects stuff that we're not legally allowed to put on packaging. There's ways you can do this, but you can't sit there and say helps with PTSD. That's against the law. But people do it all the time. And it's like, yes, we're in our infancy, but eventually these things will be brought into lawsuits and people will have to deal with explaining why they didn't know the law, because ignorance isn't a reason to avoid it, right? You still have to know it, even if you don't know it.
How would y'all compare the Washington and the Oklahoma regulatory agencies and just the overall environment?
This is a little bit difficult question to answer, right? Washington regulators frustrate us at times, but at least Washington regulators seem pretty responsive, whereas Oklahoma regulators don't frustrate too often, but when you try to get a hold of them, it's almost impossible to get a hold of anybody or get answers. So it's like, which one's worse? You know, a more active regulatory agency that's going to frustrate you, but at least you can discuss things with them and talk, or one that's not as active, but when they do something, you can't really get answers or anything. It's very unique in those two different aspects.
I wonder if sometimes the regulators don't know the answers either because it's new to them as well.
For certain. I mean, like, look, Washington's been at it for what, 8 years now, 9 years, and you still have different regulatory agents giving different answers for the same question. Now, they should be on the same page by now, but the law in the rule is ambiguous at times, and they're interpreting it just like any other human would and coming to a conclusion. So it can be a little bit frustrating dealing with that.
Are there any specific things you can do to help make the interactions with the regulatory agencies easier and to get better results?
Be their friend. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's not at the same time. The easier you are to work with and the nicer you are to them, the quicker you get things done. Just like anybody, they don't want to deal with jerks, and so they're gonna, if you're nice to them and friendly and kind of personable with them and ask them about how their day's going and their personal lives, they're a lot more likely to be friendly to you and help move things along quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Treat them like you want to be treated. Be a part of your community too, volunteer, do different things, because you never know who you're going to run into and how it may come back to your business and stuff like that. More importantly, if you don't know the answers and you're having issues dealing with that, get somebody that's an expert. Don't try to do it yourself, because you're just going to end up wasting time and energy, which is, resources in the end of the day.
What have been some good expert connects for you? Like, is there somebody that could have helped you with that architecture problem early on, or something like that?
Yeah, we could have initially, had a lawyer that had worked with building buildings out and doing all these different things and knowing what the different steps were. Um, we could have found a better contractor that was more apt to understand these things. But realistically, we could have done more research ourselves and just went to the local building department and talked to our local building department, or if at a minimum, just gone up to the local city council and talked to somebody up there. Hey, what do I need to do to start a business in your town?
Yeah, I like that. And I have found over the years that folks that do that, they just start at the local level and involve the people, all the way along the line that, of course you get a lot more with honey
Mhm.
than with vinegar. And they appreciate, law enforcement too. They appreciate being brought in and the transparency. And like you said, being friendly goes a long way, especially down here in the South. So,
I think this is a universal trait.
it is
When you
universal.
feel like you want to be treated, they treat you better.
Absolutely. The golden rule.
Yep.
Um, is there a regulatory challenge you'd like to talk about that you weren't prepared for and that you were able to overcome and address?
So I'll go back to this early time period when we were submitting our building plans, trying to get approved to just do our build out. We talked earlier about not having an engineer or architect that was able to stamp the drawings and turn that into the building department. So that in itself just took a lot of time. And then once it got to the building department, um, we were getting nowhere. So I started spending a lot of time just going up there and talking with the building department, learning what they were doing, not for us, but just in general, talking to them about what were some of the challenges that they were having with cannabis companies. Early on, cannabis companies had still been in this mindset from a gray market period where there was no regulations being followed to now all of a sudden you needed to follow these building codes because you weren't going to get your certificate of occupancy otherwise. You needed to have these things in order to the state to license you as well. So you need to make sure all these things were legit and legal. But, a lot of these gray market illicit farmers from before legalization would argue that was just the mindset they had versus trying to figure out a way to do it. So, I'd like to give a practical example. I guess Washington had a case of Legionnaire's disease back in the decades ago, and they created this building code where you have to exchange air in your buildings because of it. Well, this was no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but there was no way to classify how much air we sat there and did because there was nothing in the building code that spoke to indoor cannabis farming, right? So it's left to them to try to determine, well, where does it fall in this scope of things and how do we do this? Well, if it wasn't for all the cannabis companies that had these good relationships with the building department going up there and discussing it with them, explaining what we're doing and everything, I can only imagine how strict that standard would have been. I mean, we ended up doing something I think is a little bit overboard to begin with, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. So just a minor one on a lot of these different things that we ended up having to face. Another one that's like very practical that I don't think people really think about, you have to have exit signs in your buildings. Okay. Well, in your grow rooms, you have to have no light though, or you're risking creating problems with your finished product. But how do you introduce exit signs that don't have light, right? So it takes working with your building department to get a solution that works for everybody, still meets the life safety codes, and you can have this at the end of the day, your certificate of occupancy for your building because the building department doesn't have issues with what you're doing.
What was the solution to that?
They make exit signs that glow in the dark that aren't lit. And those are what get used in the flowering rooms. Everywhere else, you have the lighted sign that gets put up.
That is just such a typical little detail. There's so many little details that, like you said, have nothing to do with cannabis that you've got to adhere to. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. So you got approved, you got up and running, you're a year or two in. What does that look like?
Well, now we're at the point we're selling, we're trying to expand and grow. We have a brand on the shelves. We're trying to figure out how do we protect that brand. How do we ensure our growth going forward is protected and stuff like that? So we're just on to new challenges at this point. We're also looking for ways to expand. So we're trying to see how people are doing. If there's anybody trying to sell a license or anything, is there any people that want to partner, do any type of collaborations and stuff like that? So I think this is when we really started using the lawyer aspect of things a lot more.
It's also when we got the cease and desist letter from Budweiser.
Yep. So that was an
Oh,
interesting
tell
time.
us about that. What
Um,
started that?
So our original DBA name was Wicked Weed. There's a Wicked Weed brewery back on the East Coast. Anheuser-Busch bought that brewery from whoever the owners were at the time. And from our perspective, have intentions of using that name in the future with a cannabis-infused beverage. They did not want anybody using the name Wicked Weed. And there was others out there. We weren't the only ones, but we had not trademarked the name. There was a lot of, what was the other thing? I just guess it was just a trademark. But we couldn't trademark it at the time because of the legal status of cannabis and whatnot. We were limited on that. And so they said, stop using it. Stop using it or we're going to sue you. Well, they obviously have a lot more money than we do. So we decided to change the name. We changed it to With It Weed. So it's close, but enough of a difference that they can't have any issues with it.
Yeah,
Wondering about that, huh? Well, so we'll have to be on the lookout for a Wicked Weed Budweiser one day. I wonder if somebody's going to come up with a play on Budweiser. Have you seen that? Bud something. I mean, it's just ripe for that.
No, I haven't seen a play on that. But I see a play on and it happens in every state, and it kind of cracks me up. Starbucks.
Yeah,
so you all
Starbucks or
and Starbucks, I mean, they protect that brand really well. So anytime they see somebody put it up, they'll go in and do the cease and desist. Another company that is surprising is Girl Scout cookies. So Girl Scouts are enforcing their trademarks really quite a bit. If they see you using any of their names, they're going to come after you and get a cease and desist on it. So these are things.
Gorilla Glue.
Yeah, that was another one. Gorilla Glue. They
yeah.
Trademark or enforce their trademark quite a bit. So it's kind of comical because you see cannabis companies like to do these play on words when it comes to their businesses, but also their strains and genetics as well, or the products they're putting out. And these all fall under these trademark and I can't think of what the other word is, but I know you would know better than. Thank you. In enforcing those things, if you're somehow infringing on theirs, and I think some of them, it's just they don't want to be confused with cannabis, but I think other companies are planning their plays in cannabis and they want to reserve their name for that play when it comes out.
Absolutely. I mean, as we know, we've got Constellation Brands and, the major alcohol players have made investments already in cannabis companies preparing for this.
Yep.
So a few years in, things are going pretty well. At what point do you start to become profitable?
Gosh, it was before COVID, so I want to say it was around year 4 is when we started becoming profitable. Maybe 3, but it's in that time period when we bought our next license and started expanding, actual expanding, not just discussing it and thinking it. And that was 2017, 2018.
And you've made a lot of this. Go ahead.
So every time we become profitable, we end up spending it on something else. So
yeah, so I mean, you have developed a brand and done a good job with marketing that throughout Washington. Mark, could you kind of explain some of the work you did there, go into dispensaries and things like that?
I would spend most of my time early on just going to different stores. I was doing sales at the time, so going there, discussing your brand and trying to pick up shelf space, but also paying attention to what's going on in your industry. You can make assumptions on the whole if you're seeing it in most of the stores you go into. So one of the things is early on, the labeling I had designed to put on our packaging was just a clear label so you can see in the packaging, but everything was the same. So you had no differentiators between strains and stuff. I started noticing competitors doing the opposite. And I also listened to what our retailers were saying, which is, look, I can't differentiate products on the shelf, and neither can customers. So they think it's just one. Um, Took that feedback and changed the way the presentation was coming on our packaging, and this is just a continual thing, paying attention to what's going on in these retail stores. Another thing I picked up spending all this time in these retail stores, regardless if a sale got made or not, you learned more about the pricing that people were willing to pay, both the customer and the vendor themselves. So I started noticing a shelf space that was completely ignored. I came back to the company and was like, we need to adjust our prices to reach this shelf space, because there'll be a huge contingency of customers and we'll have more vendors wanting to put us in at this shelf space. It did exactly what I thought it would. And we filled a void that wasn't really there. Another like practical thing like this is I would listen to what customers were saying and talking about the joints they were buying. Most customers didn't like these 1 gram bigger joints. They really liked a smaller 2-pack with 2 joints in it that were half gram, because they couldn't finish 1 whole gram at one time. And so just came back and created a product that they wanted and put it out on the shelves for them. So you can pick up from both customers, I guess, your end customer and your intermediate customer, the vendor you're trying to get on the shelves. But you're not going to do that if you're not spending time in those stores. But the last thing that was like the most important thing is visiting the stores you create relationships with, and continuing to visit them and let them know you're invested in their sales, just like you're invested in your own company. And I think people see it as, well, if you're invested in my company and yours, we're going to have a better relationship in the long run. That proved to be very beneficial going through COVID and the outcomes since. Very few of these vendors that we created long-term relationships have we lost those relationships.
That's great. I think that's been a secret to your success, is that marketing and going in and talking and listening. I think one time you said, I've got to put aside my own opinion and listen to what they're saying, and work with that. And so if all you're doing is growing in a little vacuum, but you're not thinking about your end market or what's going to happen with what you're growing, then I don't think you're going to get very far with that. So I think that the way that you approached the entire business from the beginning to the end has been a huge success point for you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So you have about 4 years. At what point do you start looking around and thinking, I bet you we could do this in another state too?
Well, I mean, ours came during COVID. When COVID started happening and you were watching more and more sales of cannabis going on and more new customers coming into the market for the first time, we really started thinking about, what do our long-term plans need to be here? If we're just sitting in Washington, we're only reaching so many people. Do we want to reach more people, or do we want to just stay here? Well, that really got us thinking, though, like, what is Washington's market going to be? Can I say for certain that in 5 years that it's going to be the same market it is today? Well, no, because in 2020, it was a whole new market again for us, and we had already been in business 5 years at this point. So we just started trying to look at our long-term plan. We went to, I think it was like 6 states that had legal cannabis or something at that time. We went to all kinds of different states throughout the country. Went and met different owners of cannabis businesses, talked about what was going on in their regions and what they were seeing happening. And this is why we ended up settling on Oklahoma. It was just the center of the country. It was the first southern state that really had any type of legal market set up. Sales were booming at that time there. People are still coming on board, still setting up shop and everything. And we just thought that that was better for our long-term growth. I mean, fully understanding that it's going to be the same challenges you dealt with here, where you have to have years of work put in before you grow. But hopefully in the long run, you're just creating this shelf space and this demand for your company that can just permeate other markets as well.
How is it to create demand for your product and your brand and correct me if I'm wrong, but we always hear from the outside that Washington and Oklahoma are both saturated. So how do you stand out from the crowd? And what's your take on those two markets as well? I don't know if that's even accurate.
Well, I mean, Washington, I would say, is less saturated than Oklahoma. Oklahoma is really saturated. And all of the cannabis industry took a hit over the past year. I think sales are down like 30% cumulatively for most people. So that was just people for the first time in 3 years having gone back to work, being drug tested again, just these different factors that played into why people weren't using cannabis as much anymore. But I think the biggest factor was how expensive things got in April of last year. So people had less money to spend on cannabis, but they still want the same amount. So you're still selling the same volume, you're just selling less dollar amounts in the long run. But I think Washington's is a little bit more controlled than Oklahoma's is, so it's not as crazy. But we've had these challenges with the amount of money that came in during COVID and new companies starting out, new brands coming on the shelf space, that you're once again having to compete over again and make sure that you're showing your brand. Right now, we're going through a redesign of all of our labels and stuff like that again. It's the first time we've ever brought in a marketing expert to go out and study the field for themselves, bring back information to us and help us create new designs and stuff that'll meet this demand. Oklahoma, it's a different market. Things aren't branded on the shelves. You're not selling branded products or anything like that. You're just selling loose flower. So it's more about how do you design a system that can bring people into your stores. So a lot of that's marketing to your outside groups. There's a dispensary on every other block in Oklahoma. So you're watching them go out of business right now, and you're just trying to compete with the ones that are still there, trying to find what are the products that people want? How do I advertise to these customers and get them to come into my store for this product and do these different things? So it's just two different sets of ideas on how you reach the end customer or how you get people to come in and choose your product or your brand in the long run.
And how do you handle advertising? I imagine the rules are different in Washington than there are in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Do you even have any rules on advertising?
Oklahoma, it's just a different atmosphere, right? Because you can do things in Oklahoma we could never do here. The way the laws are written in Washington, you can't advertise where it may be within 1,000 feet of a school. Well, Oklahoma doesn't have that. So you can send mailers out to houses and stuff without fearing that you're going to have a school right next door to where you're sending this mailer out. Where Washington, you couldn't do this. We don't do a lot of traditional marketing. I think that that's a waste of money, to be quite honest with you. Most of our marketing is more like spending time at your retail stores, giving them swag that they're going to wear and showcase your product in the store, taking your vendors out to have a night at the bar, just hanging out with them and spending time with them. It's not traditional marketing, but it's getting the bud tenders at the store to sell your products.
Yeah, well, that's just good, schmoozing and developing the relationships, as everything in life, it's who you know. And
Absolutely.
all other things being equal, you're going to go with the guy who took you to dinner and that, chats with you every other week. So I think that was also very smart. And it's good that you look at it that way and do business that way. And that you listen to your customer. I think that's huge too. Well, so how has it gone in Oklahoma so far? You've been there, what, a couple of years now?
We just got past our first year. I think we're 14 months in. We're still not making money in Oklahoma, so we're cognizant of that. We're about to have our first with it weed products coming into the store, so hopefully we'll start making up some better margins with cutting that middleman out. That's always been the plan. But we're in a tough time in America, right? Inflation is super high. People have less money to spend, and it's how do you make it past this time period? I don't think this is forever, so it's just trying to weather this storm.
And how are you doing it? Are you lowering prices, or what are you doing to meet the customer where they are right now?
So in Washington, we have different products that we offer out to the different retailers so they can meet just the demand of whatever it may be. So there's a cheaper product and then there's a more high-end product, right? Just having those available for your retail stores and trying to pay attention to what they need and stuff. Oklahoma, it's working with your vendors to get some cheaper products in and use those in the stores. Oklahoma, we can be a little bit more creative, because if you can get a great deal on one product, I can kind of sell that for a little bit more and then bring the cost down on something else and try to make margins the same in the long run, but selling products at a little bit more reasonable price based on the actual product and the demand that's for that product as well.
Well, that all sounds very smart. Well, so for the lawyers listening to this, why don't you talk a little bit about when you decided that you needed one and what your experiences have been with various lawyers and other professionals as you make your way through this process.
You'll know way more about that first lawyer.
Well, I mean, the reality is we get to a point when we're starting to expand that we said, look, we don't know what the legal requirements are in the other states. And it didn't make sense for us to just try to learn them in-house and retain that information and hope that we interpreted it correctly. It was just better to say, hey, we need a lawyer for this, and who's the best person for this. So did a lot of research on that. There's a lot of reviews on lawyers and things like that out there as well, and looking for one that knew our industry was the key part. So finding that expertise in there, because a lawyer that was just I don't know all the correct terms, like a general practice lawyer or anything like that, didn't really do us any good. Yeah, they know the laws, but they don't know the cannabis laws, especially in different states. So that's how we chose our lawyer. Was the person knows these states, they know what happens there, they have expertise, they've already been working in those states, they have partners that also work in those other states, and so it just worked out really well. And well, that's how we ended up with you, Lisa. So that was a key thing. And then same with here in Washington, we have a lawyer here that is a specialist in Washington state cannabis law, and she's excellent at her job and has helped us guide through many different things and given us warnings about, hey, you might want to think about this. And you know what, she hasn't been wrong yet. So
No,
You're talking about Lisa Dickinson?
yeah.
The chair of our Cannabis Law and Policy Committee right now.
Perfect.
Nice. I mean, like the reason we even had to get Lisa is we were going through our expansion in Washington State. We were buying another license, and then all of a sudden we ran afoul of the rules in Washington when it came to buying another license. So we didn't realize that you have to put your money in escrow and leave it there till the transaction's finished, and then the purchaser can take that money out of escrow and the purchasee gets that license. So we paid half of it up front, and then we're holding the other half until the end of the sale. The next thing we know, the liquor board's asking us for our financials, wanting to know what's going on, and we're having to show all this stuff that we had been doing. It was really apparent that nope, we need legal representation in this, and ended up getting Lisa and bringing it into this mix and finishing that whole transaction out, and ended up getting that license. But we just realized really quick that we were in over our head right at that moment.
Have you had any negative reactions or interactions with either lawyers or other professionals?
I mean, lawyers, I don't think we've had
No.
negative, but other professionals, absolutely. Going back to our other contractors,
And they don't
Tell
tell
us some stories.
I mean, like, I can't tell you how many people I scheduled walkthroughs to come in and quote on just simple things like putting in a hose bib or running a electrical outlet, for them to come in and at that point tell you they don't want to work with you, not prior, but at that moment. That's been kind of an interesting thing. Now, another like real interesting thing professional wise that we ran into, when did the clean air come in? Was it 1918?
It was like 18.
Oh, so we had in the state of Washington, the clean air agencies had taken a case all the way to the Supreme Court, saying that because cannabis isn't classified as an agricultural product for taxes, that they can regulate it like any other product. Otherwise, cannabis would fall under agricultural and they can't regulate it. So they won a lawsuit. The Puget Sound Clean Air Agency won a lawsuit up in the Supreme Court here. I think it was in 2017. And it just set in motion for all the clean air agencies in the state to start putting cannabis businesses on registries and charging us for this. Now, in our just way we like to work and do business, it's like, why not just go talk to them and see what we can get out of this? Like explain our side, what we're doing, and maybe it'll change minds. So we went and sat down with a local politician who chairs this clean air agency board. And right off the bat, it was real combative. I mean, there was just no room in this meeting for compromise or even trying to explain what we were doing or what we were trying to get out of it. That was very telling for us, because it was like, well, wait a minute, we're trying to do business just like any of these other businesses locally, but yet we're having to defend ourselves or defend our industry, which I think was a little unfair. I shouldn't have to defend other cannabis farmers. I should only have to defend myself. Like, I don't control what they do. But
Right.
that was a very, very interesting experience, because just learning how to not say anything that's really on your mind and suck up your emotions and just, okay, be polite, because you don't know how this person's going to have interactions with you later. That was a very interesting time period.
The other interactions we have, they've pretty much all been positive.
Mhm.
I mean, we have a great relationship with our local law enforcement and fire departments. We see them on a pretty regular basis. If we have any alarm issues, they're more than happy to come by and check things out, and we'll give you a phone call and just have a nice cordial conversation with you. And it's just all around, it's actually been pretty good, but we've always been under that idea of we want to treat them the same way we want to be treated, and it's worked out well for us.
Yeah, why don't you tell them about working with the school district over in Davenport, or Reardon, I mean.
Oh, yeah, we had a local FFA advisor come to us, and just out of the blue came to us and said, hey, I see you guys are in Redwood Heights. I see you guys have this business. My FFA team is the Ag Issues team. Needs to have a topic for this year, and we want to talk about cannabis and the pros and cons of it in the state and in the nation. They ended up going to nationals with that. So Mark and I actually went and watched the presentations for practice at the school. The advisor was able to come tour the facility and came several times and learned firsthand from Mark and I various different things about our industry and our challenges. The kids obviously were under 21, they couldn't come in. But we were able to go talk to them firsthand and explain things, and they did really good with that.
Yeah.
It was a really neat experience. I think the kids learned a lot. Dave definitely gave them a different perspective and idea. Most of them came from farm backgrounds, very rural backgrounds, and to see this front and center in a different light than what they have seen firsthand and growing up and other people's opinions and stuff really was enlightening for them.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of goodwill from that experience just within the community itself, and with these kids that are going to be growing up and here soon enough, controlling the regulations and laws around it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, one thing I want to kind of start to conclude with is I think another element of your success is that your backgrounds and what you already knew how to do were well suited for how you applied those skills and that experience to the cannabis business. So could you talk about what each of your team members, what your background is in, and how you're able to apply that to cannabis?
Sure. I know myself, I was in the Army, worked for the Army for a little bit, and I went back to school for education. So I was able to just navigate some of the early regulations and make sure that we're not coming afoul of that just based on that experience working with government, and then help teach people within the farm itself how to do different things just based on the teaching stuff that I had done. And then anytime we had to be in front of anybody that mattered, I would always approach that situation just like I'm teaching a kid, and just try to inform that person I'm in front of, but not insult them, and hopefully get a good outcome at the end of it. So that was my experience, expertise I brought. I had never done sales or anything like that before, but I approached sales the same exact way. I'm going to go in, I'm going to listen to what these stores are saying, then I'm going to try to teach them about my products, and hopefully we can both learn something at the end of the day. But this guy is the one that really brought in a bunch of real practical knowledge that has made a huge impact for us.
I come from an agricultural background. I grew up on a farm, went to school for agriculture. I have a couple degrees in agriculture. And then went and worked in corporate agriculture for research companies. So actually did research in rice crops, wheat crops, and whatnot, running research stations and such. And I'm just a very mechanical person. And so that goes with that. Farmers have to fix everything. They're reliant only upon themselves for everything. So very self-sufficient. So coming in, it made sense for me to put my hands in the dirt and put my hands on the mechanical aspects of things. And so that's where I really shine. I really like kind of being that person in the background, making sure that the gears are lubed and that everything's turning and humming right along like we want it to be. And if I can keep that going, everything's great. And then our other members, one of them happens to be my father. He's also an engineer by trade and project manager. So he's able to bring a different perspective to the rest of us who are, well, quite a bit younger. We're essentially the kids compared to him. And so he's really been able to open our eyes to different things and ways to look at it and experiences and questions that sometimes we're annoyed by, but you know what? They're really good questions and makes us go, okay, we probably should think about this. And then Michelle, she's another of our member, happens to be Mark's sister. And she comes from a whole long line of corporate America experiences. So, those have been really good helping on the employee side of things as far as like how to set up benefits, how to set up PTO and sick time and, what's fair and, how does the corporate world compare to the small business? It's, there's a huge degree of difference, but we're trying to close that gap. And make it a nice situation for our employees and things like that. So we've all had these different views, and it's great when it comes to collaboration of all four of us sitting down because we never end up with the outcome that we actually thought we were going to have at the end. It's always something better. So that's really where our skills have come in, and we each just play our part, and it works. It works really well.
Yeah, I'm gonna dote on Brett here for a second though, because he didn't bring this up. Cannabis farmers, for whatever reason, want to act like they farm a different thing, when at the end of the day, all farmers are farmers, right? It's the same. Brett brought in these traditional farming techniques that we have applied to the cannabis side that I think made a world of difference for us. It brought our cost of goods down and allowed us to be a lot more efficient and make more money in the long run versus using some outdated, expensive growing styles and techniques.
And very labor intensive.
Yeah.
It's funny and thank you, Mark, I appreciate that. The first days of actually being here on the farm full time, it was always, well, cannabis is different. That was the mentality of the industry. And I always was hitting back with, no, it's a crop is a crop. Like they have different inputs, but they all have the same needs. It's just a percentage of those needs that you have to apply to them. And so I really just kind of went down that path I asked a lot of other farmers and stuff, well, what's your soil temperature? And they look at me like I'm speaking a different language. I'm like, that's really important. You need to know your soil temperature because that's where it's critical for the plant's growth. Everything on top is great, but if you don't know that, that's where you got to start and then apply the fertilizer accordingly. And so, and Mark and I've hit a lot of things off back and forth over time because, in the early days, it was Mark here by himself doing it. And he learned a lot of things and brought a lot of knowledge from research into that. And so we've combined those to make a pretty robust growing program from the plant maintenance to the bare essentials of fertilizer and lighting.
Mm-hmm.
It just works.
Yeah, I know we were using that 2-part dry mixable long before most people had ever even thought about doing it in the cannabis industry. You're seeing it become more and more prevalent today. And it's just because people are needing to bring those cogs down. Otherwise, you're wasting money on something that you don't need to waste money on.
I remember the first time I saw you mixing fertilizer, I'm like, why are you putting all those or I guess it was a dozen different components together in that? Why don't we just make this simple? Let's just pre-batch it and mix it and send it straight onto the plant. So we came up with a fertigation system, a 2-part, which is just a part A and a part B, and it's super super adjustable and it works really seamlessly. It provides everything the plants need. We can make micro changes through the fertigation system to the plants and touching them less. That was the next big thing, is the fewer times we touch the plants, that's efficiency, that brings the costs down. The plants are happier when they're not messed with anyway. So figuring those things out, and some of that I brought from my research, my R&D side of my career. A lot of those things applied. We were always asking ourselves questions. Well, how do we make this particular variety work better? What do we see in this that's beneficial? So identifying those characteristics in the different plants and then trying to select those out every time we go through a selection process for a new strain. It's very scientific and there's a lot of steps and it takes a lot of time to get there, just as if you were developing a variety. That's how we go, and it hasn't done us wrong yet.
And we're really a lot of our skill set, I think all of us brought we're data driven, right? So Brett in these research fields, Michelle in corporate America, me in the Army, everything's driven by data, right? Because you're going to see results that way. It's not left up to interpretation or your feelings. So we rely on that a lot. The inputs going into the plant and what you get out of it matters. What's selling at retail and how much it's selling matters. So we never get stuck on any one thing. If it needs to change, it changes.
Yeah, I think it's really been a good secret to your success to, like I said, apply these outside skills that you have. And I'm sure you see a lot of, we have the basement grower who has never grown anything else, but they grow that. And yeah, there is that mindset that what they do is special. And then you have them running a company for a good 5 or 6 years, and they really have no business running a company. And then, if they don't get a CEO from another traditional business and bring it in to find these efficiencies and things like that, then the company goes under. So I think, because you have started with standard practices and your other regular business backgrounds, that's helped you to be much more successful in the cannabis instead of treating it like, oh, this is its own little special thing. You're right, it is a plant, and you have found ways to be successful in growing it and selling it now in a couple of different states. So what are some of the consulting services that you're offering now to others looking to get in?
Well, I think, it's offering your services one. So having somebody that knows the different laws and regulations in these states and how to interpret them and apply them to what you're doing. Down to how do you grow the plant? How do you market that plant to your end customer, whether it's a store or the customer itself? How do you decide which strains to grow? How do you decide which products you even want to sell and put on the store, right? Anywhere from start to finish on the cannabis side, I think we have a really good, robust idea of how to handle things. Even adding in Erica and everything, we're having this ability to have more of the social media aspect or the internet aspect to these, because these are important parts to all these different businesses. But there's not a thing that we haven't dealt with in either Washington or Oklahoma when it comes to cannabis. And if you have questions on it, more than likely we have an answer or know the person who can give you an answer.
Yeah, that's really it. It's all encompassing. We really have been to what feels like all the corners of the industry. There's areas that we definitely need to learn more in, but that'll come in time with experience. And we're not afraid to go ask the questions. We're not afraid to go research things and learn the answers. Mm-hmm. So that's the big thing for us is, I think, if we don't have an answer, we're going to get one.
Yeah. I think most things like that most people starting in the cannabis industry, though, are things we've already dealt with. There's not many answers that are going to be, or questions that are going to be asked that we don't know the answer to right away. And a lot of things are simple, but not really thought about. How do you want to package your product and how do you want to ship that product to the store? People don't really think about that. I never once.
It's not the fun part.
No, it's not. But you don't really think about, well, where do I get boxes to put joints in? Where do you even get those, right? So you have to figure that out. We've already figured this supply chain out. So these are just these different services we can bring to people that look, you don't need to waste time figuring out your supply chain. You don't need to waste time figuring out your SOPs for your business. You don't need to waste time reading through rules and regulations. Let one of us help you get to that point, pay for the service, and then you concentrate on growing your business. Actual growing the plants, packaging it into the package, running your store, paying your employees, those type of things.
We'll give you that foundation to sit on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can take it from there. Because once you have the foundation, you're in a really good position.
Yep.
You know your efficiencies, your areas that you can continue to improve on. But just having those basics down is really the critical part. It seems like so many people just don't know where to start. They have so many things coming at them from every direction that they just get overwhelmed with it and don't know how to even start with the first issue that comes their way.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. We've watched so many people go.
Huh?
We've watched so many people go out of business. I mean, just so many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you have a lot to offer in your experience and your success. And I know that all of the considerations people need to have when they don't even know that those are questions that need to be addressed, since you have been through it so much. So how can folks get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, you can go to the Southern High Points website, and on there's our contact information. You can come visit us at the different events we're traveling to throughout the year. I'm sure we'll get a list of that up on the website at some point. The farm itself here in Washington, that would just be withitweed.com. Yeah, am I forgetting anything up that?
What's your email address?
Mine is Brett at withitweed.com. That's BRETT at withitweed.com.
And mine's just Mark, MARK at withitweed.com. I know we have our Southern High Points one, but I'm drawing a blank on it right now for some reason.
It should be Brett and Mark at southernhighpoints.com individually.
Okay, for some reason I was thinking it was abbreviated, so my bad.
Well, this has been really great. It's been really eye-opening. There are, so many considerations, as we've mentioned, that you have no idea when you're getting into this business, and you're excited about the fun parts of the business, but there are so many parts of the nuts and bolts that aren't so fun, that all have to be handled and addressed like perfectly under all this regulatory scrutiny. So great job, guys, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Well, Lisa, I got a real quick question for you.
Sure.
What do you think that you see most often when it comes to cannabis companies, their biggest mistake?
I think a real big mistake is, we've focused talking a lot about what you do on that end market and the market and everything. And so I think apart from being naive and not having professionals around you to help you, I think also it's just focusing and narrowing in on that one little thing that you're doing without getting feedback from others or considering what the market is. Who are you going to sell your product to? So you could grow it, that's great, but then what are you going to do with it? So you've got to have the whole thing lined up. And so I see a lot of people who are just excited at the prospect of getting a license to do anything, and they just kind of go for it without running the traps or seeing what all the risks and obstacles are and coming up with a plan for how you're going to overcome all those things. Like you've just given a few examples today, and in every state it's different. Every state's got its own regulatory agencies, its own laws and regulations, its own mentality. It's where we think differently here in Texas than they think in New York. So it's understanding that local politics as well.
Yep. Well, hopefully we can all help bring some success to other people, and they can avoid some of the pitfalls we commonly see in this industry.
Absolutely. So thanks again, guys, and we'll be talking again soon.
All right. Thank you.